I don't know who to look to. Great. So great to see you. Good to be with you tonight. This will be the third Sunday evening that we have talked about Matthew 18. Such a significant text. I might remind you that this particular, especially this part about leave the 99, you might remember was part of the parable that Jesus also gave in the 15th chapter of Luke. And he gave that under the conditions of the scribes and Pharisees ridiculing him because he had made a friend of publicans, tax collectors, and just outright sinners. And he had associated with them. And so he told, this was a part of a three-part parable. You'll remember lost sheep, lost coin, and lost son. So Jesus has said this on more than one occasion. This particular occasion, of course, is one that we have been looking at then in Matthew 18. And the main thing that we have talked about in this is how important lost souls are to Jesus. So important that we need to consider them, those who are lost, over our personal preferences. And that's a hard one. I can tell you just by the experience I've had in my life in preaching in different places that sometimes people can get quite upset about not wanting to give up something that is just simply their personal preference. It has nothing to do with anything scriptural. And it's something that we need to really consider when we're talking about those who are lost. This is an eternity, and Jesus has stressed this here. This is someone who is not going to make it, and if something's not done, if we don't reach out. I think the other thing that we talked about that was significant here is that when Jesus talked about that, he said in verse 13, in verse 12 and 13, he leaves the 99 on the mountains to go search the one who is stray. And then verse 13 begins with, and if he finds it, indicating that he goes on the search, regardless as to whether, not knowing really whether or not he will find it. But he goes on the search anyway. Anyone would do that, even for a sheep, if you're a shepherd. And Jesus is saying, basically, if you did it for a sheep, would you not do it for one of these little ones, these vulnerable ones that Jesus has died for? And so it's a very significant thing. We've talked a lot about that. Just as a little refresher, we asked this question a few weeks ago: are there scriptural changes we could make as a church that would enable us to receive and not cause one to stumble? And are there scriptural changes we could make to become more welcoming to the lost in our community? I might just highlight one thing that I don't think are on this next list, but that needs to be on the list. And it reminded me as we were singing here. One of the most important things every one of us can do here, we have people who regularly drop in and visit but have not identified with us as members. They regularly drop in. Maybe it's just a solo person who just quietly sits over in the corner, gets up and walks out afterwards. I would urge, let's all make, I've failed in this a lot of times, but let's all really get dedicated to pursue those types of people. Let's really get dedicated. If you, for a simple example, if you go out to eat on Sunday afternoon, which I know a lot of you do, include one of those individuals. Grab them before you go and say, hey, we're going out. Please, would you join us? Just little things like that can make a huge difference. It's described as being like Barnabas, and most of us can do something like that. So just a little reminder just in that. This group is fantastic in connecting with people. You do wonderfully. I don't think anybody comes and feels like they're left out. But we want to make sure, as Chip has reminded us over and again in Thessalonians, to increase our love more and more. And I think that's very important. So here's just a quick list of things that we talked about. And we don't have time to talk about each of these. I picked one of these that was brought up at the end last time. Outsider focus on a quarterly study with questions. We want to talk about that some more. Outsiders informed worship, knowing what's coming, and awareness of when questions be asked. I need somebody refresh me on what we were talking about on that one. And this one too, discussion questions posted to us on the website. So here, just I'm going to hit these real quickly, and then we only have time really to talk about one of these. Page numbers with readings, that's going to be maybe on me and on anybody who's speaking up here. And I'm glad I wrote these things down so we could try to remember to do some of these things, the great ideas. Group discussions on personal opportunities. That might be something that we all talk about and think about more just on our groups when we get together as a group to talk more about opportunities, people we're trying to deal with. That's very encouraging when you tell me or the rest of us that, hey, there's somebody I've been talking to, I've been inviting them, I'm trying to get a study with them. I need to know, we all need to know who this is so we can include that in our prayers. Most important thing we do in evangelism is praying to God will help open doors for us and give us these opportunities. Brainstorming on ideas to make connections, to teach, etc. That's a great point. Saying amen at the end of a prayer, I long for that personally, that as a unit we say amen as it's talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, that we audibly actually say an amen. We can talk about that more because we didn't really get to talk about that. And then the final one that was brought up, but what the sign Church of Christ has on it and communicates. So that a lot of you have communicated to me and talked to me about this, some pro, some con, all this. So let's just discuss this without getting nervous that there's going to be some big change next week. But let's discuss this just from a biblical discussion. So I'm just going to ask some questions and talk about some of these things. So we just let's get a scriptural foundation of it first and foremost. So here's your first question. This question's for you. What is the purpose of a sign? In other words, what are we trying to accomplish? Love to hear your ideas. Anybody want to start us off? What would you say the purpose of our sign is? What are we actually trying to accomplish with the sign?
For people who don't already have a relationship with us to know what's going on here.
Okay. We want to communicate to people who would not have a relationship with us. I like how you said that, Jerry. You're saying with us, not with the building or not with some organized thing, but they don't have a relationship with us. Trying to communicate basically who we are, maybe something. That's pretty difficult, isn't it? In a brief sign. But that's one way to look at that, exactly. Communicate just basically who we are. Anyone else? Another idea here on what's our purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? Yeah, sure.
Most business signs are trying to communicate what that business does.
Okay, good. A business sign is going to communicate what does that business do. Maybe you've noticed, by the way, along with that, I think that's a great point. Because how many times have you seen a commercial and at the end of the commercial it just flashes some kind of business sign? The commercial said nothing about what they do, and you got to the end of it and you go, well, that company just wasted about $300,000 because I have no idea what that company is and what it does and why they should be advertising to me. I would want to fire the advertisers immediately on that kind of thing. But it's true. We want to somehow send a message. What do we do? Okay. Why are we here? What really is our purpose? Okay. Anybody else?
Gary.
Yeah.
To pick someone's interest, maybe is a little dated from all the other.
Okay. Make a differentiation from other churches. We, in some ways, are blessed in this country to have people who at least believe in Jesus, and there's all kinds, of course, brands and stuff of churches, etc. And we are blessed. I like to know that there are people around me that at least believe in the Lord, even if they don't maybe put an emphasis on following Him in every way, but at least believe in the Lord. But we want to make some differentiation. We maybe along with that, we want to highlight what we think is really important about serving God, maybe like knowing Him, learning about Him, etc. This, like we're not putting on the sign, come to the great band tonight, or something like this. We're trying to differentiate in some way. Good? All right.
Definitely don't want to hook like that.
Yeah, we're not interested in, in fact, we might say that the main hook is the Lord, and if there's any hook here, we want it to be Jesus, and we want it to be His Word, and we want it to be learning His Word, and we would like to communicate that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To something that catches an eye. We have 100,000 people or so who drive by here constantly. Which interesting you said that, Lee, because as I'm driving in and our grass has turned green and the sign is green, I went, we have a green sign blending in with green grass. And it just kind of, I had never thought about that before until that just happened, and that green sign just blends in with that green grass. And of course, if you're going 50 miles an hour, as most people do as they drive by this building, it might not be very noticeable. Okay, good. So there's some things like that, yes.
I listened to something about the first sign that was used to denote where Christians would be, and it was the sign of a fish. And that meant in Greek, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. And that's essentially the message we're trying to get to people with our sign. Okay. That, when there was great persecution, they would use this as a symbol so that others would know they're safe through you. I guess that's kind of what we want.
Yeah, we would want to communicate something like that, even though the fish is not going to communicate that today, but it was something that was used then, definitely to communicate that. Deb?
Probably need some practical information on there, like what time you're going to find this, maybe directly to our website where they can learn more about it.
Right. Practical information. I like the idea of maybe a website address, something like that, where they can go and get more information. Maybe some of those things are still hard to maybe spot when you're driving by as fast as this road goes, but still, that's an excellent point. So I think we can summarize that we're really trying to express who we actually are, what we exactly are trying to do here, what is our purpose here, something like that, and that's pretty difficult. Yes, sir?
Got a couple of members place membership recently, and their first comment to us was that they were looking for someone teaching the Bible.
Okay, good.
So I always got the sign that says Bible believers, Bible followers, Bible teachers.
Yeah. So very good. So, and I run into that same thing, is people saying, they were looking for some place where the Bible was really taught, etc. When I was in Fayetteville, Arkansas, the elders, they had a discussion with the whole church about, because the sign looked really, it was old, needed to be changed. And so they had a discussion with the whole church and just got ideas and things of what they might put on the sign. And then after they had gotten everybody's ideas, they announced, we're not telling you what's going to go on the sign. You'll know when it shows up with the truck. Now, that's the way they handled it, like it or not. But they said, we've listened to you and we've come to a decision. And they didn't tell me. And I'll never forget, Brent was training with me at the time, and we saw the truck pull out, and we went running out of the building to see what was actually on there. And what was unique about it is they had small a, church, small c, a Church of Christ meets here, undenominational Christianity. So what was interesting is it actually did increase the number of people who visited, and I would ask people, why did you decide to stop by and visit? And I got this answer many times. Well, I saw undenominational Christianity, and I assumed that meant you just taught the Bible and not creeds and doctrines. And I went, bingo. That's kind of excited to actually hear that response. And Fayetteville, Arkansas is very much like here. It has tons and tons of different kinds of churches of Christ, etc. But that little point, just having that on the sign, actually helps send that message. So anyway, there's a lot of things like that we would see. What we're trying to accomplish. Let me follow up with a question like this: by what authority? How would you argue with somebody if they said, "Well, by what authority you'd even have a sign?" What would your argument be biblically to say we are authorized to have a sign? Maybe you never thought about that. Don?
These are just thoughts.
Well, if the thoughts are wrong, we shoot you here.
So when you look at Paul and any other apostles, they usually will address a local church to the church of God, church of Christ. So I would just that would be a starting point. This is Paul. He is addressing the church, and he is identifying them with Jesus. And so in the same way, it would seem that we would follow that same example.
Yeah, okay, so good. We have examples of Paul referring to local churches, and as you suggested, there's a lot of different ways that he did, and we're going to get a list of this in just a second. There's a lot of different ways that he referred to local churches. Thus, when we think about how you would refer to a local church, let's maybe suggest this. It isn't a title as such. It is what? It's what?
Location.
Okay, it could be a location, yes, and that was part of that. To the Church of the Thessalonians, it was a location. In other ways, what was it? It was a description. It's a descriptive term. So that is important. Whether it's Church of God, Bride of Christ, Body of Christ, there's a lot of descriptive terms to refer either to the church universal or to a local church. So it's important, I think, to get in our minds. We also, can you think of another scriptural reason or a way that we would authorize biblically why we would have a sign? Have examples of it. If it's descriptive, really it goes back to what are we trying to accomplish? Is it evangelistic, in other words? Yeah, that's the way I would argue, just as Donald said. But I would also argue that we're in the business of trying to share the gospel in some way, try to let the world know that, hey, we're interested in you. We're interested in teaching the word. Maybe you're frustrated by going places that just have entertainment or things like that, but if you're interested in really learning the word, we would love for you to give us a chance. So it's an evangelistic tool as well, and I think any of us would certainly agree with that. So briefly, just to follow up on what Donald said, here's some descriptive terms that are used in the Bible to describe a church or a church universal. Maybe you've never noticed this, but in the book of Acts, the way is used 5 times. in the book of Acts, and you can see the scriptures on here. If anyone, they talk about persecution of those who were following the way and those who were against the way. And it's really interesting to see the various ways that Luke went about describing the church in those days. Like when he talks about Paul in chapter 9 and verse 2, he asked for letters to the synagogues at Damascus so that he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Kind of interesting, isn't it, how Luke described that. Now, obviously, we put the way on the sign. I imagine our entire community would go, huh? What? Probably very, very few people would even understand what in the world is going. Of course, I drive by denominational churches all the time, and they have some sign that I think, what? What are you highlighting here? I am really confused. So you'll see that, as I said, 5 times in the book of Acts. You'll see Church of God used 8 times. That wins the most, and most of that is in 1 Corinthians. You'll see it in Acts 20 also, but you see Paul mentioning the Church of God many times throughout the book of 1 and 2 Corinthians, and then also in Galatians. And then you'll see, as Alan just pointed out, you'll see to the churches of, and referring to some church or churches of, certainly for some location. The churches of Galatia are mentioned in Galatians 1, and then in Thessalonians to the church of the Thessalonians. And so identifying who they were, it's a church that is made up of Thessalonians. And in Thessalonica, so you see that term also used. And then you see a lot of introduction to letters to the saints, and it might be to all those in Rome called saints, Romans 1:7, to the saints who are in Ephesus, Ephesians 1:1, to all the saints who are at Philippi, Philippians 1:1, and then to the saints and faithful brothers in Colossae, Colossians chapter 1 and verse 2. So you see that used all the time. And then, of course, the word body of Christ is used, or just body in other places too, but body of Christ used in 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 27 to emphasize, of course, that it is filled with different parts to it, descriptive again. And then, as most all of us would know, one time in Scripture, in Romans 16:16, the churches refers to the churches of Christ. And just wanted to emphasize there the context. This is a series of greetings. In fact, the most lengthy series of greetings that you'll see in any letter in the New Testament. Paul spends a half or more of a chapter sending greetings to different people, from verse 3 all the way down through verse 16. Greet, 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 greet. And then he summarizes it in verse 16. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you. Kind of interesting. I'll just throw out another little question. In Fayetteville, when the elders changed that to a Church of Christ meets here, we had some people visit from communities, from churches in other areas, and I got a letter back one time where a guy wrote back and he said, I can read in the Bible about the Church of Christ, but I can't read about a Church of Christ. So what's your scripture for that? And of course, he was mistaken. Number one, if the churches, plural, of Christ greet you, then a Church of Christ might greet you too. And number two, Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 20, when you come together as a church, well, if you are a Church of Christ, then you came together as a church. And that was certainly scriptural. But I smiled a bit, wrote him a nice note back, and said, here, and gave him an explanation of that. But that indicates, of course, something else. But you see the context. I think we could all safely say Paul Paul didn't write Romans 16:16 to tell us what to put on the sign. Could we safely say that, I think? So, especially other things. All right, so those are some of the things that come up there. So, ask this question. How did God intend for us to identify His church? Just wanting you to make a natural conclusion from what we have just looked at. How did God intend for us to identify the church? Local or otherwise? Yeah, in some way as it relates to Him. Sometimes it even was identified as relates to us. The church of the Thessalonians, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of descriptions. Jeff?
I think, though, for a location like in Thessalonians, since you use that one specifically, he also has a qualifier on the end of that. He says the church of the Thessalonians in God.
In God. Good addition. Thank you. So at any rate, there is a connection, obviously, to Christ. I think all of us would pretty well agree. We read a church sign that identifies that church in connection with some reformer or some whatever that is not in the Scriptures. We would probably all go, yeah, let's keep it biblical, please. That would be one of the things that we'd want to do. The point here being is that when we look at this, what are we really looking at? We're basically understanding that God did not give us a title, a specific, this is what you call a local church. So I'm going to ask a question right now that I want you to think about just a little bit, and you're going to think it's off the point, but it's not. Why are we authorized to spend a collection money in building a building like we have? What's the authority for doing that? So what? We need a place to meet. How does that authorize it? You're right. How does that authorize it?
It's the means to accomplish that goal.
Okay, so He gave us a commandment to meet, didn't He? All right, He gave us a commandment. I have heard, unfortunately, even Christians lots of times go, well, there's a lot of things we do that we don't have any authority for. When you hear that, put your skates on and run away. Because that is a way of saying, I've got my thing I want to do that doesn't have authority for it, and you already do things that doesn't have authority for it. And but boy, I'll tell you what, I hear that all the time, especially from people who want to do things that there's no authority for. So, and they'll mention the building. We don't have any authority for the building. Of course we do. The Lord commanded us to meet, and He commanded us to meet regularly. And, so how are we going to do that? How did Jesus tell us to, where did Jesus tell us to meet? He didn't. And you said, well, we got some examples where they met in homes. Yeah, we got some examples where they met in schools. And we got some examples where they met in a temple. And we have there's all kinds of places they met. There is a book that was put out. I think it was by LaGard Smith a number of years ago. Was it LaGard? No, it wasn't LaGard. I don't want to blame LaGard. I don't know. But there was a book put out. Cancel that because I'm not positive. There was a book put out on radical Christianity, and it was like, we need to meet in homes. Okay, so let's say we got to meet in homes. All right, all of you here will meet in one home. All of you here will meet in one home. We can never grow past about 35 or 40, and that would be the end of it. And we know that wasn't true in the New Testament days. There were thousands in the early church in Jerusalem, and they all met in one place. Now, you say, why do I bring that up? Well, because we are given a commandment. And many of the commandments we're given are generic in their nature. In other words, go to the store and buy some bread, son. What kind of bread? I don't care. Buy some bread. He brings back raisin bread. I can't argue with him because I said just bread. There's all kinds of different ways. When Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations, can I go on a motorcycle? Well, of course I can, because he didn't give me a way to go. He told me I could go any way I did. And I mentioned the motorcycle because for years that's how I went. And too much fun. At any rate, that's authorized. Okay, it's the same thing with a sign. It's the same thing with a lot of things. We're told to sing. Well, you got to sing together, and you got to then have some words, and you have to have maybe a book or a screen or something. So there's a lot of things that are like that. And when it comes to identifying a local church, there's some leeway there. And that's what we need to consider. So we're going to ask two questions. First question is one side, and the next question is the other side. What are reasons why a sign change would be advantageous to teaching the lost? The next question will be, what are some disadvantages? Why should we not consider it? So I want to look at both of those. So what are reasons why a sign change would be advantageous to reaching the lost? If you believe that, maybe you don't believe that, that's fine. But what would be some of those, Karen?
When I first moved here, people would ask, oh, what church do you go to? And when I said where we worshiped at the time, they'd say, oh, you belong to that church. And not that specific church, they were saying Church of Christ.
Right.
And there's been several times since then that people have said, oh, I don't go to church anymore because I had a bad experience there with Church of Christ.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has heard that, but I've heard that a few times.
So I would almost like to ask a show of hands for how many people who have actually encountered that same experience. I'm sure there are a lot of you. More recently, I had a neighbor live next door to us. They've since moved, and we have a new neighbor in, so he's next. But the last neighbor, I got to know them. Wayne helped out a lot. He got to know him, did things with him. We just became really pretty good buddies. And so I got to the point where, man, I'm ready to ask this guy for a Bible class. I'm ready to, he's going to say yes. I've done this long enough to go, I've gotten to know this guy. He would never say no to me at this point. And I said, hey, he's not working. I said, why don't we get together and study? How about we study? And he went silent for a second, and he said, what church is this? And I says, Woodland Hills Church of Christ. I said, we're just over there off Old Hickory. Oh, well, maybe I'll come sometime. I could just tell as soon as I said that, it was like, and I was shocked. I went away going, really? We're friends. I caught all of his moles in his yard. I mean, come on. We did a lot of things together. Wayne did a lot of things with him. We really worked hard on this, but it was just very, very notable, and that's happened many times. Jerry?
I can't remember when, because it's so far back. I had so many negative reactions to saying a Church of Christ that I stopped mentioning when someone asked me. I go, well, I go to a non-denominational group.
Yeah.
Like that was because it's just rote habit now because I had so many things.
Right. So, and I have too. I've gotten to the point where I just almost choke on saying Woodland Hills Church of Christ, because I am so tired of getting that same response, and I've heard that from a lot of you. If you have not, maybe you have not experienced that, and I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but maybe you haven't experienced it because you haven't actually asked or mentioned or had a discussion with somebody and had them ask that question. Now, if you were living in California and somebody had asked that question, and you said, well, I would say I'm a member and preach at the El Cajon Church of Christ. It's on Johnson Avenue. And they wouldn't blink. Oh, really? What's that about? Having the slightest idea what I'm talking about. Where Brent is down in West Palm Beach. Have no idea what a Church of Christ is. Absolutely no idea. It'd be absolutely silly they would not even dream of changing anything on the sign because it doesn't have anything to do with anything. Now, if you're in Tampa, there at least is one church, the North Livingston Church, where they have the Christians in North Livingston or something like that, I think, meeting here, and they felt that was important there. They've done that. They did that many years ago, and have done quite well. Okay, so I guess the first thing that we've heard here is it's difficult to mention Church of Christ and not have a pushback. A lot of us have the feeling that, a lot of you have the feeling, as I have run into many times, where I don't want to tell them where I am because I'm afraid I'm going to lose the opportunity, and I try to get a better rapport with them some way. You know, sometimes they'll say, well, the sign says Woodland Hills Church of Christ, but we're not Church of Christ. We're not the denomination. So I want you to get that out of your mind. They're like, and why do you have that on the sign? I don't know. I don't say that. I'm saying in my mind, I don't know. It has always been a real struggle. Julie, would you like me? Julie wrote, and so did Neil, a detailed thing. Would you like me to read it, or do you just want to say it?
No, it's fine, I guess. I don't remember exactly what I wrote.
Well, I thought you wrote. Both Julie and Neil wrote this out. Julie said, "When I tell people where I go to church, I want them to understand that we are different from most churches they know. I want them to understand that I study only the Bible and I'm not tied to any man-made system of doctrine. We're not trying to be like anyone else, only be like Jesus and early Christians. All of that is destroyed when I tell them I go to a Church of Christ. They hear the Church of Christ denomination. In parts of the country where the church is scarce, this may not hold true. But here in the South, there are too many churches of Christ that look just like denominations. I think we need a sign that draws people into simplicity, that doesn't automatically turn them off by painting us as just another denomination." I thought that was well said. Neil wrote this: "Frequently when people are looking for a church or to learn more about God, they are looking for a non or undenominational church. That is us. But they don't know that. When they hear or see Church of Christ, they immediately think another denomination. That hurts our ability to reach the lost because the people who would appreciate our teaching and independence are turned off before they know us. We need to find a way to keep our name and the way we present ourselves from hindering our ability to reach the lost." I thought both of those were well thought out and well said in that regard. Excuse me, if you have something else that you thought was advantageous in not having Church of Christ on the sign, please say so. But I thought we've got just a few minutes. What are reasons why we should not consider changing a wording on the sign?
When I've driven past other churches that have changed their sign, not a Church of Christ, but say go from a Baptist to a very vague term, like journey or something, I'm like, wow, they have really, I guess, left everything that they thought of before, the tenets that they thought were good. So maybe this could confuse people, but maybe that could be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know.
Yeah, so good point. Sometimes you drive by and it's pretty, like you said, journey or something like that, something nondescript, and you look at it. Sometimes you see the journey and then very, very, very small words, a Baptist church, something. So you see that, and I realize it is obvious that even a lot of denominational churches are struggling maybe with some of the same things that we're struggling with. So as far as description, and don't want to be considered just a part of a big denomination. Okay, good. Adam.
I have 2 points that are conflicting.
Me too.
I think the first thing I would say, just in general conversation, I've had conversations like have been mentioned here. The first one was in 8th grade after we had moved here. But I would also say people who act like Church of Christ is somehow indicative of what the believer taught in a group. Haven't really driven around much because on Old Hickory Blvd, you can find congregations that are significantly more conservative than we are. Maybe part of some of and you can also find groups that are significantly more liberal. Everything you can imagine that you would find both as liberality. And so, as a result, in this conversation, I always think it's interesting when people have somehow distilled down what Church of Christ must mean, because when I look around in general, you can't just look at Church of Christ and say, "Oh, I know what to expect when I walk through those doors."
Yeah.
I think that the second piece of why we might not consider changing the wording of our sign is because there are people who come here because our sign says Church of Christ.
And they're looking for a Church of Christ.
And I think it would be interesting to know of the people who worship here now, how many would have come if this sign had not been.
Yeah. Chad may not. Chad dropped in because of that. Yeah, so you make a couple, I think, of real good points there. One of them, the second one, simply being that when people move into town, they are considering that. The North Livingston Church in Tampa, if it weren't for them, I would probably be somewhat more concerned about that. But they seem to have, nobody thought they were, completely gone haywire or weren't still, at least those who were brethren, understood what had taken place.
I'd be careful using
What? Tell me that later. No. Yeah. Oh, I'm not approving. I'm just simply saying, if we're just going to look at it from the standpoint of what, is somebody going to drive into town and avoid the North Livingston Church just because it didn't have Church of Christ on the sign? That doesn't seem to have been much of a problem for them. Who was next here? Let's see, Jerry. Yeah.
One of the things I feel like I'm hearing Adam say is there's no perfect verbiage. There's not going to be everybody universally will see this and they've got it.
No.
And I think that's part of what we're just trying to address is, could there be other things that could be better that we could try?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the question. But there's no automatic. With anything, you've got to dig. You've got to learn. Just because it says church, I'm going to visit and go, what are these people about?
Right.
Who are
There's
they?
lots. That's the. I guess that's and there's, just as Adam said, I'm in the same boat. There's sometimes I look at this and I go, but I don't want to leave the wrong impression either, etc. So it's difficult to think in those terms. I have to. For me, what weighs me on one direction is we're trying to reach lost souls. By the way, I know what I was going to say, but on your first point, Years ago, when I was discussing with this with the elders at Fayetteville, and they were very interested in making a change, and of course they left a Church of Christ on the sign. But even that, we was talking about a change. I just. I think you're wasting your time considering it, because as younger people come along, they don't know who we are anymore. And so this is we're going to outgrow this. In other words, we're going to basically come to a point over time where nobody knows what a Church of Christ is. I thought it was a good point. I thought there was still some hole in it, because if you're in a community like Fayetteville and like Nashville, there's a billion of them, and I don't care what age you are, they identify that, another, denomination.
Did you turn your mic off?
How about that? Okay. Sorry. Michael been wanting to say something.
I think whether it's a good or a bad thing, it's going to take a lot more intentionality as to what happens in this building, because there are some things that the Church of Christ is known for at large, like no instruments, typically, that we do here, so we don't have to explain to somebody who's walking in the door. But it's going to take a lot more effort on like our websites and things like that to really show what's happening inside this building.
Right, and that's correct. I love what Debbie said as far as. I think more than anything, we would like to direct people to our website as much as possible. By the way, if you haven't looked at the website in a while, we've been doing a lot of refurbishing and stuff, and I really like where it's going. And there would need to be changes like that as well. Donald.
Yeah, another thought is this could be seen as a Band-Aid to an even bigger issue. And I think regardless of whatever route we take, we have to understand what the Bible means when it says that we are a part of the Church of Christ. We have to clearly communicate that to people, because I remember when I became a Christian and I was trying to teach my people about the Bible. In my head, I felt I knew I was saying the right thing, but the way I was communicating that was making it seem as if, we are the only ones going to heaven.
Yeah.
So I think, I think this is good, whatever we do, but at the end of the day, we are the ones who have to go out and teach people. And in our presentation to people, we need to clearly understand what the Bible means about being a part of a Church of Christ.
Yeah.
So that's why I say
a church. When you say a church owned by Christ, basically.
Right. People who are identified, by their relationship with Jesus.
And by the way, Donald, you bring up something I think is very interesting. Teresa has done some research on my family in Arkansas, etc., and my family back in the early 1800s. We're talking 1810, 1820, right at the time that you have Alexander Campbell and Stone and these guys doing a lot of these things. And a lot of my family lived in Lawrenceburg for a while, and then took an opportunity to go to eastern Arkansas when they could get 40 acres of homestead, and moved over there. And it was interesting, they called themselves at that time a congregation of Christ. And there's, over the years, especially in those early years, there were, if you went to just local areas, you didn't have a universal term or description in local churches. So you can go to Boston area, by the way, and you can find a lot of churches of Christ. Now, but they're not, they're Episcopal or they're this or that, but they have on the sign Church of Christ. In fact, you read commentaries all the time that refer to, not us, but being a part of a Church of Christ. And they are referring to it in the sense, biblically, of following Christ. So it is, I just simply say that to say, It was never, even in the Restoration movement, it was not started that way. Like, okay, let's all get together and think up a good sign, and everybody has to follow this. That's not the way it worked. And I would imagine my family that went over to eastern Arkansas probably didn't even know Stone or Campbell. I just went, what do we call her? You know, that was the way that was. So, Adam.
I would say there's another thought here too, is like all the good names are taken.
Yeah.
Well, just kind of do that as there's some general things like Christians meet here or something like that we could potentially move towards. But I love Church of God.
Sure.
That's pretty taken. Like I don't.
Yeah, that's really taken.
People will be more confused about what we believe.
Yeah.
I think Church of Christ and Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't work either.
Like I'm good with that. For Latter-day Saints, that one's got some issues too.
Yeah.
So I think, I actually, while humorous, I do sometimes think that this topic is, if we get more specific, the name's taken.
Yeah.
And I don't act like I know every good name.
Yeah.
Most of the specific names that we see congregations addressed as in the Bible are taken.
Right.
And they bring with them more connotation.
Yeah, the more beyond the more.
And so, as we think about what would we want to be named, most of it will be something generic, Christians meet here or something like that.
Yeah.
Or it will be, or it will, we might not like this, but we could be the Fellowship of South Nashville, right? We could be the Way of South Nashville, but that makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah, because we're not sure what we're communicating then, and neither is anybody else. Yeah, and that's when I've thought about this. And by the way, when I have opportunities and I teach people, I usually the subject comes up just from them in some way, and I ask this question: if we had on the sign, Woodland Hills, Christians meet here, undenominational Christianity, would that make a difference to you? Would that have made a difference to you when I asked you about having a Bible study? And I've had universally, absolutely. Why don't you do that? Now, Louis and Rebecca have a great story on that, because I studied with Louis, I don't know, about 8 months before he became a Christian, and Rebecca, she really was struggling with a lot, and I don't blame you, Rebecca. But the thing is, you ever Googled Church of Christ? Not a pretty sight. Not a pretty sight. You get a lot of very, very negative. You get people who hate our guts. And the reason they do is they were an ultra right-wing conservative church that tore them apart growing up. I've run into many people that are that way. And man, I mean, you can go through tons of that. And Rebecca ran into that and was asking me, why do you have this on the sign? It's horrifying when you look at this. So go ahead, you say something.
That's what I was going to say. So, coming from a background where I've never heard of Church of Christ, and mostly coming from an area where non-denominational churches were prominent, community churches, because denominations were not common. There was like occasionally somebody that went to a Baptist church, but this wasn't really much of a thing. A little bit Nazarene, that was like basically us and Mormons. That was pretty much the category we were in.
And you were in evangelical type churches.
Yeah, evangelical were from those churches. And so, for one, when I see a church and there's 100 other churches in town with the same title, I assume it's a denomination. So, church moving to this area, seeing Church of Christ on dozens of times, I assumed it was a denomination. When I Googled it, you learn the only ones going to heaven, baptism is essential, instruments are evil, the most extremely unfavorable and charitable descriptions of it, and it's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
There's no way to, if we did not have a personal connection, it would have never gone.
Right. Yeah, and your personal connection, first with Melanie Hill, and then eventually with us and stuff, gave you just a little bit of, okay, I'll put my toes in the water for a second and check this out. But like you said, I think without that personal connection and a little bit of grace toward us, it probably would have been an ultimate failure. Micah.
So I'm trying to put this together in my mind, how to say this, but I also feel like at the same time, kind of to Jerry's point, there still is no right answer that will give us something that will just tell people that we're doing the right thing here, and we're truly following Christ. We're doing the best we can to truly follow Christ. And I feel like no matter what we do, we also know that Satan is working to be more and more clever. So things that obviously Christ is still in control, but things that we do are still somewhat of a band-aid too, because if we were to change the name, somebody will be offended by the name that we change it to in some way, somewhere down the road, and could potentially be a stumbling block, not because of what we're doing, but because Satan is at work.
Sure.
So, just my personal preferences, I have run into many people who have heard me say, I attend or I'm a member of a Church of Christ, and have immediately shut me down. I've also run into a lot of people who when I've mentioned God or faith or Jesus or anything like that, have immediately shut me down as well, just as quickly,
sure.
Just because, again, Satan is at work,
right.
And he is working to pull people away from Christ, and our goal is to point people towards Christ, and that will be offensive no matter what we do. Mm-hmm. And I think it is worthwhile for us to consider these types of things on how we can improve or find ways to be more welcoming to people. But I don't think that, and I'm not saying that we should do it, I'm just saying I don't think there will be an answer.
Not anything perfect. That's right. Not anything perfect.
There will always be,
right.
The opposition will always
be always going to be some things. And by the way, here is one thing we all need to be aware of, that the number of people, the percentage of our population, even in the South, that go regularly to any church is decreasing rapidly. As I've mentioned in some lessons about a year ago, we have way less than, we literally gotten to the point that in the 20 percentile and under of our population even believe in the God of the Bible and believe that you need to follow the Bible. And I mean, you'll have people say, oh yeah, I believe in God. Oh yeah, I believe in the Bible to an extent. Things like that. But it is rapidly decreasing. I just read an article on this recently, and I was shocked of how few people, percentage-wise, anymore believe that. So when we are addressing some of these things, our population is very anti-denomination. That is huge on their brain. And that's the only thing that has always triggered me to think maybe we should reconsider what we brother. Personally, like Adam said, what do you come up with that hasn't been quote unquote taken? And the only thing I could ever think of is Christians meet here, Woodland Hills Christians meet here, undenominational Christianity. By the way, I like undenominational if we did anything, not non. Non-denominational tends to send the connotation that we accept all denominations, we don't ask any questions, that kind of thing. Undenominational, we're not part of a denomination. This is not part of that at all. But there's a lot of different things.
Denominational or non-denominational is now the new denomination.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It can be the new denomination. So you guys make great points. So let me just clarify as we come to an end here, and thank you for participating. None of this was done till we're going to come to some kind of monster conclusion here, and next week you're going to see something different on the sign. But I thought it was important that we discuss this, and And just so that all of you know that there is a frustration that goes on, especially with, and most of you are this way, especially with, talking to others about the Lord and then having this response. And it has been, it's tremendously frustrating. It's a tremendous hindrance. Brent down there, he just goes, I get to say whatever I want, and nobody asks any questions because nobody knows what a Church of Christ is anyway, because there aren't any around. And I like, oh, that sounds so good. So anyway, give it some thought. It's been a discussion that elders and I have had some brief discussions about and things and etc., just because we know your feedback, and I think it's important that we talk about it. So continue to talk about it. Right? Thank you for your time. We're going to sing a song right now, and then we will have brief announcements and a closing prayer. Brief announcements, right? All right, let's stand and sing.